Welcome to Coffee and Divination, a podcast about the arts of obtaining hidden knowledge in changing times. Join me, Joanna Farrar, to chat with experts from around the world on tarot, runes, geomancy, and the many ways divination can help us navigate and plan our paths ahead. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for the people tuning in live, and thank you for the people listening afterwards when we put this online on Spotify and all the other places. My name is Joanna Farrar. I am the Assistant High Priestess of North Wildwood Coven, which is a part of the Temple of the Spiral Path. And I am very happy to have as a guest today, T. Susan Chang. Ms. Chang Susie, is the author of Tarot Correspondences, Ancient Secrets for Everyday Readers, which is published by Llewellyn. And she co-hosts Fortune's Wheelhouse, the Fortune's Wheelhouse podcast with Mel Moline, which has been going for several years now and has quite a number of excellent episodes. She has a tarot course online, The Living Tarot, and she gives readings online. I'm assuming probably not in person at the moment, although she does
exactly
do that when possible. Yes. She also designs and creates beautiful tarot deck cases called Arcana cases, and crafts personalized astrological perfumes, as well as speaking several languages.
No. Take that part out. No. We're live. We can't. But no, really, English is my first, second, third, and fourth language. I just dabble.
I heard something about Greek.
yeah. It's one of my dabbling languages. Yes.
Okay, I'll accept that. I still am impressed by the dabbling language. So thank you, Susie, for being here, and thank you everyone for joining us. My first question is, how did you get started in all of this? What drew you to tarot? When did that happen? How did that happen?
Yeah, so I started, I guess I was one of those people who really did not trust things like tarot, like most of us, or like many of us probably, for most of my life as a young person, because it just wasn't serious. But then when I got to college, I had a sort of a down the hall dorm mate who had a deck, and that was the first time I saw a tarot deck. I was amazed by it. I thought, wow, there's a system, and she's learned like 78 meanings. How on earth do you do that? And I thought, obviously not for me, but nevertheless, I found myself sort of dropping in all the time into my friend's room and kind of like trying to get it reading kind of sideways, like you do, this thing has been on my mind, and kind of looking at the cards and kind of hoping she'd offer, kind of a thing. But yeah, that was my introduction to tarot, and didn't really think it would happen for me. But then it was probably not until another 4 years after college, when I was living in New York, that you kind of start trying to do all the things that you were afraid to do before. Hopefully everybody does that in their 20s without killing themselves. And for me, one of them was tarot. And I decided I would get a deck and just see what happened. And I think I had the same experience that a lot of people have in the beginning, which is just like, at first things are either like super chills up your spine, numinous and synchronistic, or they're just like, what? There's nothing here. I don't get it. So I think, I always tell people who are starting out to just kind of stick with it and give yourself a chance to get to know the cards, because it's like getting to know a person. It takes a little while.
Yeah, that's so true. I wanted to ask, were there any particular tarot teachers or books that you feel really set you, or if it's not tarot, even if it's just like occult or esoteric, things that helped you along? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think for everyone, I think not just for me, but for everyone, the best teacher is yourself, because tarot is like acquiring language or like acquiring any skill. It's something you learn by doing. And although you can definitely find resources like tarot correspondences, and and I definitely also had teachers. I was in my early years, I used to just join up with Wald Amberstone and Ruth Amberstone's group in New York. It wasn't so much, it's for many years, I've believed that you cannot teach someone tarot, but now I kind of believe that you can teach someone to teach themselves tarot. And that's what I do in my course, because I really think that, you know, the way tarot works, it's not like, you know, you look at a Four of Pentacles and then there's some meaning that you sort of like remember it's supposed to be, right? It's an accretion of years of talking to the deck and kind of living it and experiencing it. So there's really two things I tell people to do when they're starting out with tarot, which I think are, if you do nothing else, these two things are the things that you should do. The first thing is to keep a card of the day, or 2 cards of the day, because that will give you an opportunity to see how the card manifests in real life, not just in theory. You know, it's like when you read the Little White Book, you're going to see things that say, you know, it means harmony, it means union, it means et cetera, et cetera. What does that even mean? You know, like what in your real life, you're thinking of these keywords that you saw in the Little White Book and you're looking at it and you just fuzz out because it doesn't make any sense. So, you know, I think it's really important to draw a card a day, see how it really literally pans out, what you did that day, how it matches up. And that starts the dialogue going between you and the cards, so that eventually you have personal meanings, not just meanings from the cards. So like a card that shows you if it rains, or a card that shows you if you have a fight with your sister, or whatever it is, there is a card for that. And the second point, that besides doing a card of the day, that I like to tell people is that you should, everything in life is in tarot. It's kind of like astrology. It's just it's a cosmology. It's a world system. Everything in life is in there, from that fight with your sister to tying your shoe to falling in love. It's all in there. So this is the concept that I call backwards tarot. If you start with the idea that you have to, you know, look at a card and know everything it means, you're going to fail. However, if you happen to be walking into a courtroom, for example, and you say to yourself, what card is that? Then you can put it in your filing cabinet, right? You can say the Justice card could be that. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one correspondence, but everything we do, like you and I talking, that could, I don't know, maybe be a 3 of Cups, or because it's over Zoom, maybe an 8 of Wands. Everything out there has a corollary in the cards. And as you start to build up that understanding of what goes into every card, it begins to become richer and fuller and talk back to you in ways that start to make more sense.
So this kind of ties ahead to something that I wanted to talk about a little later. When it comes to developing that relationship, why don't we talk a little bit about decks? And when you're talking about drawing a card or 2 per day in order to build that relationship, to build that depth of meaning, I'm assuming that then you would suggest that people use one deck that would become their, I will now use this deck and this will be what I will be developing the relationship with. Or do you think that there could be multitudes? I think I've heard you say that Rider-Waite is a good beginning one. That's what most people do. It's what I certainly did. That was my first deck.
Yeah.
I have that deck, beloved, in the cabinet, you know.
Right. I mean, I think that, you know, it's, I love Rider-Waite. I think it's good to have a really sound familiarity with one deck, for starters. And then, you know, once you know what the, if you can sort of come up out of your head with whatever the meaning of the 7 of Swords is, you know, then, and you have a really strong sense of that, then I really think you can use any deck. But I think it makes sense to start with Rider-Waite-Smith, because it makes sense to start with a language that's spoken by many people rather than, you know, I speak Klingon, you know, that's great, but who are you going to talk to? So, you know, I mean, it's good because there's so much conversation, and it gives you an idea of the variety of interpretations that can go into a given card. And anyone who's, you know, on a tarot forum and says this card only means this, ever, it cannot mean that, is just wrong, you know, because it means what it means to you personally, you know.
Yeah. I think that was another question. You've almost, I'm going to ask it anyway, just to see if you have more to say about that. But I feel like a lot of times it's very possible to get stuck, or I've seen people get stuck on the little white book readings of things and feel like they need to read they need to read and memorize a lot in order to feel comfortable with it. Otherwise it can feel overwhelming to them, which I think there's a place for that. Like anything, it's an art form which requires technique, and it requires time and patience and learning your footing with it. Mm-hmm. But how do you feel that balance is between helping people get from little white bookness out of it into that? I'm sure this is covered in your course.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because the book is very left-brained, you know, because it's like, I'm a Virgo. That book really shows that I'm a Virgo, but, you know, but I really believe that it's, to learn tarot is a balance, and that memorizing really only gets you so far. And it's like, and because the process of doing a reading is such a fluid process, trying to use that part of your brain, that sort of tabular systematic part of your brain while you're doing it, is often what causes people to freeze up. So I sort of feel you have to kind of go at it all different ways. I mean, to use the musical analogy, you know, the memorization and the sort of like study of the card and the kind of like long hours of reading meanings, which a lot of people do, that's like the scales, right? That's like practicing your scales. But when you're performing, you don't want to be practicing scales, right? It's different. That's all sort of embedded knowledge and embodied knowledge. So I sort of feel like that about learning tarot as well. I think that, you know, one thing we talked about before we went on air is that there isn't really a wrong way to read tarot. In terms of the kind of learner you are, it really could happen any way. I mean, I've seen people get results by literally picking up the deck and the little white book and reading off the meanings. I think that can work. I think that the limitation of that technique is the limitation of the little white book, which is not the beautifully nuanced, rich and varied and layered perspective on the world that every single one of us has as individuals. So you can't bring that back to the reading. You can say, you know, you know, this is going to represent heartbreak, or this is going to represent a new job, but that's like, it's like coloring in pencil, you know, in crayon, compared to what you can do by living with the cards, talking to the cards, getting to know them and make friends with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually, you instantly went to something that was actually going to be a separate question, but I feel like we've already in our discussion answered it. But I am going to say this for the people who may not know. One of the things that I found really fun is that Susie went to Juilliard pre-college, so she was also a musician, and I went to Juilliard for graduate school and master's and all that. And so I was going to ask, how did you, and I will still ask it in case there's more that you want to say, how do you feel that your musical background in some way informs today how you are as a reader?
Ooh, that's so interesting. I think of that not so much as a reader, but in terms of magical practice generally, in the sense that, you know, I mean, I think being a musician, like being any kind of artist, allows you to find your own magic in a way, right? You know, it takes you to a place where you know that this is bigger and more special and more, you know, juicy and numinous than just everyday life when you're doing a particular thing, whether it's a written thing or a musical thing or whatever it is. And that is a feeling that you're looking for in magical practice as well. So if you can get that feeling through music, I think you can, you know, it may be a shortcut to being able to find it in magical practice. Another thing is that one thing that I think about all the time in terms of magical practice in music is the idea of the earworm. So, you know how, I don't know whether this is especially true of musicians or just people who are, you know, seriously into music generally, but there's always something going on in there, right? There's always like some weird little bit of a tune or something happening. And I think that that's kind of how magic works. I think that there's like, you know, we're constantly all doing magic, even if we're not ritualizing it or, you know, or trying to make a technical display or something elaborate and Instagrammable. But there's a constant sort of soundtrack to our lives, and I think that in the same way that the tune you have stuck in your head will color your mood and your actions and shape your world, I think that there's a corollary for that in magical practice as well. And that in a way, the way you engage with your cards is like that, right? If you get the Tower in the morning, right? And you think you're going to have a shitty day, then there's a pretty significant risk that you might make that happen magically. So I think one of the things that I teach in my course, less so in the book, but more in my course, is how to talk back, how to engage in dialogue with your cards and retain a sense of free will in a predictive environment.
Well, this is skipping ahead, but I want to ask the question, fate or free will? We've brought it up already, so.
Yeah. So this is always the big question, and it's my favorite thing to think about in the world. And I think that one of the things that's really helped me understand the shape of fate in the world is astrology, which many people have more familiarity with than tarot, actually. And the idea that, the things that show up in your chart, for example, they're going to show up. There's 100% likelihood, but the way in which they're going to show up has nuance, has variability. And that's true for tarot too. So, if you get the Tower, there's 100% certainty that you're going to have a Tower-like event, but the shape of it is negotiable. And so I think that, one of my ideas in my practice is that the free will part of it is the part that says, here's a spectrum of kinds of events. Here's what I'd like to put in a bid for, let's negotiate. I recognize that you have this menu of options. Let's talk about which one of those I would really like to see in my day.
Yeah, and then you're sort of trying to direct how that is going to occur, if possible, into something that is more handleable or one you would dislike less.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is, the astrological equivalent is like, how do you handle your Saturn return, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of it is like being in the driver's versus being in the passenger's seat, right? You're still going to go to the same place, but you are going to experience more or less sense of agency, more or less sense of literal nausea, depending on where you're sitting. So a lot of what I do has to do with trying to put yourself in the driver's seat. So for example, let me see if I can pull out my deck here. So this winter, I got the 5 of Pentacles, which is not everyone's favorite card. It's something that shows up in a lot of different ways, the Lord of Worry for me, but and in fact, one year I got it more than any other card. But it can be anything from worrying about something to having an injury or sickness, to being locked out, to being slowed down, to it actually snowing outside. That's something that happens with this card for me. And there's also an older meaning associated with the decan of Taurus that it corresponds to, the first decan of Taurus, that has to do with what you might do during the first decan of Taurus, which is planning your garden or your crops, measuring and dividing and being careful about that. It's a Mercury ruled decan. So, so when I got this card one day last winter, and I was really not interested in having some of the harsher qualities of it manifest in my day. Some days you have more capacity for that than others. the thing I did was I went and there was a door in our house that the lock was broken. It had just one of those little slide locks. And that had been bothering me for a long time. So I went and fixed it, because to me, this is about locks and keys at some level. So, and that was my sympathetic magic for the day.
Yeah, so sympathetically then choosing a route that you would prefer that can allow that card to manifest in a way that doesn't involve you being
Exactly.
locked out of the house. Instead, you're fixing a lock.
Right.
Just a
Right.
more favorable way of dealing with that needing to have
Exactly.
life. Yeah.
Exactly. And in fact, so on the Fortune's Wheelhouse Academy group, which is sort of a fan group for the podcast, we all do spells in the morning, and there's a lot of a sort of a running commentary on what if you get the Ten of Swords. What did you do about it? What did you do? What did you do sympathetically? And one thing I like to say when I've done the thing, whatever it is the requirements have been satisfied.
Don't need to send anything further. It's covered. So
Exactly. And maybe sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I like to think it works more often than not.
mhm.
But but the fact is that you have some control. And this actually makes me think a little bit of the subject of reversals in tarot, because
Actually, we had a question about that. Let me
did
off
we?
our question. This is from Athena. What are your thoughts on reversals? I feel they aren't necessarily negative, but how can a reversed card be meaningfully read? So perfect.
Right. Funny
With
you
that.
should ask. So, yeah, so I think it's really interesting to think about reversals because, some people read them as opposite. That's a very traditional way to do it. I don't. I have a whole sort of framework of thinking about reversals. I sort of think of them as an asterisk, on the card. It's like there's a straightforward way to look at this and there's a skewy way to look at it, and the reversal is the skewy way. One of the things I think about reversals is that, it could be that the energy of the card appears to be there, but isn't. It is there, but doesn't appear to be. It's coming, it's going, it's liminal, it's in shadow in some way. But one of the things that I think is good to think about for those who are attracted to the idea of using the opposite meaning for reversals is that every card contains its opposite as well. So what I mean by that is like that Five of Pentacles we were talking about, it is it is it is not just a question of worrying about your health, but also attaining your health, right? So it's like the thing and its opposite are both contained in the card. The card presents the subject matter, but not necessarily the way that it's going to show up in your life, right? So I could have the Four of Pentacles, for example, Mr. Miser or Mr. Squatty Potty, I like to call him sometimes, that just shows that money is on your mind, right? That could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. You could be saving it. You could be hoarding it. You could be obsessed by it and it's ruining your life, or it could just be a sense of security for you. So, there really are multiple ways along a spectrum that a card can manifest. And one of the things I try to teach people to do is to imagine how a card might show up in the most negative and the most positive way within its range, because they all can. The Tower too. So as far as reversals go, I try to use them in a way that adds as much as possible to the reading, given the context. Because, one thing that we sometimes you will hear as a cliche in tarot is the idea that something negative is not really negative, it's just the fear of that thing happening. And that's something I try to avoid, because sometimes really bad things happen and you do have to take the card at face value when it says that. But reversals can kind of help you understand how much agency there is, how much flexibility there is in the interpretation. Like if I see an entire spread full of reverse cards, I will take that to mean that literally everything is up in the air. Anything could happen. Here are some of the currents, here are some of the trends that are at work, but you have a lot of say in what's going to happen. Another thing that I use reversals for is gaze. So this is something I borrow from the way Tarot de Marseille readers read, which is very image-based and very keyed to the image. So keyed to the actual information, visual information in the cards. So particularly with court cards, something that's really good to do is just sort of look and see which way the card is facing. And if it's upside down, that it's facing in the opposite direction, especially if you're doing a relationship reading. If he's, if this page is looking at, sorry, mirror, looking at the Knight of Swords, that says something, right? And if the Knight of Swords happens to be looking back, that also says something. Whereas if they come up this way, that says something else, right? So that's something I find very helpful in readings. And another thing you can do is if the Page of Wands is, just sitting there at the edge of your spread, and there's nothing out there, you can put something out there to see what he's looking at, and see what really is on his mind, if not what you're reading about.
And then that would be like a form of clarification for what he's
exactly
looking towards. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So I find that very helpful. I think it's this is an interesting thing that, I think Gordon on RuneSoup has a kind of different way of reading cards from what I do. It's much more, it's the idea of fixed versus fluid meanings. And so, to me, when I look at at this Five of Wands here, it's going to have a wide range of meanings that I always go to. Whereas a person who has fully fluid meanings might look at this and say, well, this just happens to have a visual parallel to some game I see out my window, or some other thing that, and depends much more on the moment and the image than some sort of broader abstract context that you're bringing to it. So, I try to use all the tools at my disposal for any reading, whether it's the visual component or the the esoteric information, or just past experience.
Yeah, because the answer oftentimes is it depends, even still.
Right.
With all.
And I think that part of, what helps you figure out which is the right meaning for the moment is part of that process of tarot that is a mystery, that, where you let go and you turn off that side of your brain that wants to be able to make sense of everything, and just sort of let what comes up come up. But it's all there somewhere.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just looking at some of the questions that we have. Some of these we will get to these a little bit later. Going back to decks, I think I just wanted to ask you, is there, someone submitted a question earlier, not through the Q&A. Their question was, are there different decks that you go to for different types of questions? Do you have one that is just your go-to, that for every question you go to that? Or would you say that there are personalities of decks and types of questions you would go various places, like a time that you would use Marseille or an Oracle more oriented deck or something like that, or
yeah,
not?
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, Rider-Waite-Smith, of course, because I end up doing that for probably half of my readings, because it's something that people who know a little bit about tarot can relate to and look up after. And then, of course, if there are people who are more comfortable with Thoth, I will use that. For people who are conversant in astrology, I will use Thoth or Tabula Mundi. So a lot of it has to do with who I'm reading for. For myself, my favorite deck is this little tiny deck that is a Rider-Waite clone, but it's Pam's vintage. It's kind of a tea-stained, kind of grubby, borderless looking kind of thing. And it's heavily laminated, so it stays clean. Nice. That's my go-to. However, there are certain things that I use for certain purposes, like the Psy Cards deck. I don't know. Have you ever heard of that?
I do not know that deck.
2 seconds. It's right behind me. I'm going to grab it.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just checking through our questions. Oh, and I have a couple of more. Excellent.
Lots of treasure chests full of decks back there. So the Psi Cards deck is an oracle deck. This is the only oracle deck I really use. It's beautiful. It
Beautiful.
has like 48 cards. Here's one that says Union. Here's one that says The Voyage. And I use this card almost exclusively for finding shit I've lost, because I lose things all the time. And for some reason, it seems to work really well for me because, I almost have too much information in a tarot deck to deal with. And by using this kind of deck that has a kind of a more basic visual language that I don't have a million associations with, it seems to be a little bit easier for me to find stuff. Like one day I lost my headphones, I think, and I got this card, which is the moon, and it's kind of dark and it reminded me of my basement. And yeah, they were there because I was doing the laundry and I dropped them on the floor, kind of a thing. So.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I was just about to say, could you give us some examples? Because I need that technique. I really do. I haven't thought to use tarot for that.
Yeah, well,
Nancy, I know, has a history. I was talking to Sam about the history of finding things, but I didn't know about that. That's fantastic for tarot.
It's great. It's great. I think if I use tarot to help me find things, chances are I would be like, it would tell me how I felt about finding things, why I lost it, how I can prevent myself from losing it again, but it might not actually tell me where it was. So.
When you just need to know where it is, please.
And I think actually Lenormand cards would probably be really good for that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to answer a couple of questions in the chat, and then I have a couple of things I want to get to. But speaking of different decks, I think this ties in, especially with the one you just showed us. Athena wrote in, I've been hearing of many readers redesigning, cutting off the edges of their tarot decks. What are your thoughts on edging and modifying card decks?
Oh yeah, I deborder regularly. This is my go-to thought deck. I hacked off all the edges on that. I think it's, I really love I think one of the things that draws me to tarot, like many people, is just the beautiful artwork, and anything that gets in the way of that kind of annoys me. The other thing is that, and I don't think that there's, I think it's okay to modify your deck and hack them in different ways. I think that you want to be careful with that because that's magic, and you're working with live power, but I don't have any like moral strictures against it. Yeah.
So my follow-up to that is, how does tarot work? Why does it work? I mean, I honestly know I'm just really curious to hear your answer about how you think about that, or if you think it's best not to look too closely at that, shall we say.
That's a really great way of asking that question, is it best not to look too closely? I mean, I think that actually, just to answer the second half of that question first, sometimes it is best not to look too closely because, where does meaning arise, right? Is it from the sense of awe? In that case, yeah, don't mess with it. But if it comes from someplace else, then, then it should be durable. So what I think, and I don't have a mechanistic theory, I think most of them are pretty silly when you hear about the mechanics of how things work. But I tend to take a fairly hermetic view about where meaning comes from, in the sense that, as we say, as above, so below. Now, in astrology, that means that, what you see in the stars reflects what's going on Earth, right? And in tarot, you can use that same principle, as above, so below, as within, so without. So there's a reflection. You can use the cards to externalize what's going on. And I think the best sort of description I've heard of what's going on is a verb that I first heard my friend Christopher Warnock, who's an astrologer, using, which is the idea that meaning co-arises between, the reader and what is read. It's not that one precedes the other, but that it's all there all the time. And it's kind of just a matter of looking. So, I think there's something definitely different and magical about the act of looking, because most of the time we don't. But I think one of the things that divination allows us to do is to insert ourselves in the making of meaning in a way that is subjectively constructive for us, even though it doesn't necessarily mean that we are defying fate or saying something counter to what fate decrees. It's a way of putting yourself in alignment with the way things are going and figuring out what your role is in that and what level of self-determination you have within it.
Yeah, it's the act of asking the question helps to allow the information to come to you. If you don't ask the question, then that fate can't coalesce into something that is understandable and that you are partnering with.
Right. I think there is definitely sort of, by practicing tarot, by practicing dream work, by sort of communicating with the parts of yourself that you don't normally communicate with, it allows you to be an agent in the conversation in a way that a lot of the time we aren't. And to me, that's the game, that's the goal, that's the game, and that's the goal, to have a say in where you're going and what you're doing and why. So I know it's hard to talk about, but I think that there is a degree to it in terms of what is the way that this works. It comes down to being able to feel you're a part of it versus being able to versus feeling like you're just being carried along, and that meaning arises from being able to say you are a part of it and seeing where you fit in.
Yeah, and I think that sense of agency is really important. I think sometimes when people are concerned about getting bad cards, shall we say, a card they don't like, Tower or Five of Pentacles or whatever it may be, is that it's the important other half of it, which is the magic, which is knowing that this is a conversation. Not necessarily one that you have always the deciding voice in, certainly not, but.
Right. But I think it's like, when people say, oh, I'm never going to read tarot because, I like to think I'm in charge of my fate, and it's like, well, you still are. It's just a way of being able to be aware of it and to talk back. So, so to me, the idea that fate is bound up in the use of a divination tool in ways that are fixed and unalterable is not useful, to think about it that way.
Mm-hmm. Someone had a question. She actually emailed this as well, and she put it in. Katerina emailed a question saying, let me see, the usually harsh and hard meanings of swords when compared to the other suits. Why is that?
Yeah, so my understanding of that's a great question. I mean, my understanding of swords is that, most of us in tarot would say that they're the suit of the mind and of the intellect. And that I think if you kind of look at your life or at life in general and ask, where do the problems come from? Going at it as backwards tarot, most of them come from up here. So that to me explains a lot about the suit of swords, right? It's like our ideas about things are what make them terrible or wonderful. And and I think that you could conversely say that swords, the power of swords gives you the ability to recognize that that frame of mind, which seems so hellish, so terrible, is also just a matter of perspective. So, Kabbalistically, air, or the suit of swords, is, the place of magic. It is the place where we go to do things that are that change the actual real world around us. So, I think it is a wonderful and terrible power, and I think that that's reflected in the suit. I think, like, if you look at something like the Three of Swords, which many people do not like to see, one of the things I think about that card is that what it does is it concretizes things, thoughts. So, the reason that it so often comes out as heartbreak for people is because, well, now you realize something you can't unrealize. The thing is over and it's not coming back, right? And that's why you're sad. But, there are many situations where it's really good to look something in the face and be honest about what it means, and that it's not going to return to some fantasy that you had before or the way you wanted it to be. So there's a level of clarity in this card that I think is often overlooked.
Yes, it may not be exactly what you want to see or hear, but that is a very powerful message that it's giving through that. Right. Let's see. Out of curiosity, are there any other types of divination that you practice, or are you, you have enough on your hands with tarot, so I'm not saying, well, you must have tons of time to do other forms, but I'm just curious.
Well, this is something I think about all the time. I don't do a lot of other forms of divination. I dabble, I've done, I'm a little bit of a political junkie. So one thing I did in actually I did it much of this year during the Democratic primaries, was that I was doing spreads for them all the time. But what I did in the 2018 midterms, I took out every tool I had. I took out the tarot, I took out the side cards, I took out the runes, I took out the yarrow stalks, I took it all out, and the Lenormand as well. And I did the Divinapalooza, and just to see what would happen. And and it was great. It was fun. And it was accurate too. So that was great. But no, I would say that tarot is my bag. However, I do really believe that that divination itself doesn't have to be as systematic, or as, you don't need to have a tarot deck, is what I'm saying. I've done things like, I'll be sitting in the woods and I'll be thinking about something and just fiddling around with some sticks and stones and moss, right? And getting answers that way. And I believe that that's completely valid. That is, to me, the purest form of divination. I would like to be doing that all the time. But unfortunately, my brain seems to be, keyed to this right now. And but I really do think that that is the same thing, and that I think that there is immense value to being able to do that. There was a I don't know if you read Terry Pratchett.
Yes.
But in the that series that he wrote about Tiffany the Witch, I can't remember what they were called. It's a young adult series, and she would do things like, she would always be carrying random bits of stuff in her pocket, string and paper clips and whatever. And when she needed a divinatory answer, she would just take the stuff out of her pockets and put it together in a big jumble and read it. And she would always have an egg with her because she needed to have something live, which I love the idea of that. But anyway, so that to me is true divination. The idea that you can just sort of grab whatever's at hand and put yourself in the state of mind where that makes meaning. And to me, if you can do that with anything on hand, then you can read tarot. You can read anything, right? As long as you know how to get to that place where meaning is extra.
Absolutely. If I'm in crowds, which hasn't been happening a lot lately and probably won't be for a little while.
Right.
I remember, I always think back to, I can't remember the name of it, of course, but the Greek form of divination, where it was divination inspired by Greek, would be like the next thing you hear. Yeah. And sometimes I'll just think a question to myself and the next passerby. And I have had incredible things where you just think, would someone really have said that as part of their conversation going by me? But it works beautifully.
Yeah.
It's wonderful in a city to be able to do divination by what's around you. And that is, I think, really getting
Same
a part
thing.
of it. Yeah.
Same thing, or bibliomancy,
Bibliomancy, yes, of course, yeah.
that too as well. And I just think that it's wonderful to recognize that that's all around you and accessible at all times. And it reminds me a lot about the way we think when we're little. It's sort of like jumping over the cracks in the sidewalk kind of a thing, because that means something in particular. But I think one thing that's kind of important in terms of that breed of magical thinking is to recognize that it works both ways. So, one thing, and I don't know, those of you who have kids have probably had the experience of, being terrified for your child and having these horrible visions of them being hurt or, having an accident or something. And I think, just as with the cards where you have a conversation, there's an imperative really to be able to do that kind of visualization yourself, that visualizes them safe and whole and protected, because you are doing magic all the time, and it's good to be able to get control of that so that you can do positive magic when you effortlessly find yourself falling into some kind of nightmare scenario in your head. Even more so with dreams, when speaking of nightmares, if you have a nightmare and you can get control of that in your head, if you happen to be able to go lucid, or even if you're in the dream state and you think, you know what, let me see if I can just face this thing, that also is incredibly powerful work, I think.
Absolutely. I wanted to pivot a little bit towards questions and the art, because we're talking about getting answers from various different tools and how it works. How do you with this? So let me choose wisely for the first one. If you were talking to someone who is not used to doing divination and they say, I don't know how to ask a question, what is your go-to advice to someone to pick a good question?
Yeah, if I have zero time to explain anything more nuanced, I will say, formulate your question in the following way: what do I need to know about X? Because that's generally a really good way to do it. If I have a little bit more time, I will explain to people that I prefer to avoid the word should in readings, because again, the fate free will thing. And that works for me because, and you can still get real answers, because I believe in the possibility of getting answers about the future. So instead of, what should I do about X, Y, or Z? One of the things I almost, that's my go-to technique for that kind of decision is, here is what will happen if you do A. Here is what will happen if you do B. And then we sort of look at it, and that still puts you in the driver's seat as far as deciding goes, but it gives you a little bit of information that should help in theory.
Without expecting like the cards to just tell you what to do. It's giving you information gathering about.
Exactly. And sometimes, sometimes they will just start shouting at you, because they do that sometimes. But we give them the opportunity to speak in a respectful and civilized dialogue.
Yes, exactly. Actually, that brings up, so when Sam Block was on as the guest before, he mentioned something about a view that he had of the difference in sort of attitude. I don't want to use the word attitude, but the ways in which geomancy versus tarot will answer people's questions. And he had mentioned that geomancy, he feels, answers more exactly the question you ask. Tarot will sometimes be nicer and kind of not maybe answer the question you should have asked, but somehow push it a little bit more in that correct direction. Would you say that, or do you think that's more to the reader to get, whatever?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. I think a lot of things go into the personality of the answer. I think that part of it, the largest part of it is the reader, but a lot of it is the client. The person who's asking the question shapes the answer as well. You say something very, very different to a 6-year-old who's coming for a reading, or a 50-year-old man. who should know better. but yeah, and I also think that part of it is, your frame of mind when you're going to it, and your habits. When, if you ask certain kinds of tools, certain kinds of questions, then you're always going to get certain kinds of answers and certain kinds of attitudes. So yeah, I don't know. I don't dispute the validity of the experience people have as readers, where the personality of their deck seems to be very wry or funny, or or impertinent. A lot of people have expressed that from tarot. But I think it's like with any relationship between two people, what one person experiences as rude might simply be experienced as honest by somebody else. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
it's just about the relationship.
We have more questions, but I wanted to just say, since we've been talking about questions, Susie has agreed to do something really wonderful, which is super, super special, and I'm very grateful. She is going to help demonstrate some of these concepts a little bit later in the interview. At a certain point, she's going to answer a couple of questions that people submit. And in order to keep it anonymous, you guys have been really great about using the Q&A and the chat. I am going to enter, I created a Google form document for this, so I'm going to enter the address for the Google form, which you can click. You'll have to actually copy and paste this address, because in the chat bubbles, you can't click directly on it. It doesn't work. I wish it did. But you can copy and paste this address. Well, maybe you can click on it in this. No, you still have to copy and paste it. And then you can go and enter a short question. She just gave you some good tips on formulating a good question. And then I will randomly choose, I'll use a random number generator and randomly choose a couple of questions for her to answer. Either were you going to do one card or two cards, or what did you want to do?
Depends on, I tend to do 2 cards for relationship things, but 1 card's for most other questions I can do.
Sounds good. So, and that will be a way of kind of getting some perspective on some of the things that come up.
Oh, and the other thing that's happening, just a quick plug for this, is that on Fortune's Wheelhouse, our next podcast episode, which is on the 27th, is going to be a divination episode. So that's one where we take 1 card questions, and we kind of use esoteric, it's a much more technical form of analysis that we give people, and that's still available.
Absolutely. And if you are not a patron of that, you should be. I now am. I'm very happy. So I will be submitting my question for that. So okay. If you submit questions and it doesn't get answered, if you become a patron,
that's right.
Submit to her and then it'll get answered. So do you have any, I think we had something about reading. We had a couple questions about reading for people. Let's see. Could you please, yes, Alan asked, could you please talk a little bit about anything you've noticed about bedside manner? In other words, what's a good way to quickly find a rhythm with a querent's personality? Because I wanted to talk a little bit about.
Yeah, I think I try to be very careful about the way I handle people, because I think that when people come to you with a question, they're incredibly vulnerable. And they're usually, they're very often at a kind of a difficult moment, and that they may project onto you a lot. So I try not to take on very much of that if possible. I try not to express more authority than I have, right? I think especially the more desperate the situation, the more control I try to give back to the client. So I definitely try to avoid, putting on too much mystery on me, because I think there's enough just from the tool and from the circumstances, and, people bring enough of their own shivers that I don't really need to add any. And for the same reason, I try to keep it just I will literally try to shape the answer to the question as much as possible, rather than trying to put too much English on it.
Yeah, to keep yourself a little bit more objective. And
yeah, I try to get out of the way. A lot of the time, that's the reader's job. A lot of the time, I just don't even remember the sessions after I've had them, because it just goes straight through me. And that, to me, tells me I'm doing my job if I'm not entirely there. Yeah.
Do you help people, would you say that you help people shape their questions, or is that part of the objectivity where you just say, well, this is the
Um,
question they want to ask, so.
Only insofar as some questions I'm better at answering in certain ways through
Mm.
tarot. I mean, like, if somebody asks me, you know, well, if they ask me a should question, I'm very likely to reshape it in the way that we discussed. If they ask me a when question, which is also tricky with tarot sometimes, like, when should I do this? What date? I have tools for doing that. I can do it, but I would rather say what needs to happen first. What's the signpost that you need to get past? So I will usually offer options. But if I do something very, very specific, like these 10 days in May, which I can do, it will probably come with a disclaimer.
Sure. Would you be willing to talk a little bit more about the time-related techniques? Because I find that really interesting.
Yeah, so that is strictly correspondence based. And so, pretty much any card except for, let's see, the 4 elemental cards, the 4 major elementals. So, meaning the Judgment, the World, the Fool, and the Hanged Man. Any card in tarot will have some timing associated with it. So, for example, I'll just pick one here. This is the 3 of Wands, which corresponds to the 2nd decan of Aries. So, if you wanted to be very reading by the table, as they say in Marseille, you would say that this corresponds to like March 30th to April 9th, kind of a thing. So you could pretty much, if it's a question about something that's going to happen within the year, you might be able to pin it down a little bit that way. But I don't like to push tarot into a corner too much with it, but sometimes it just works. So, and I accept it when it happens. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really excellent. With the timing thing, does that mean that if somebody were to ask a more generalized question of, let me see if I can find a way to phrase it, what do I need to know for this summer? Is that too time oriented, or do you think that
No, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Oh, and the other thing about timing is that tarot likes to layer things. So a lot of the time, like if I drew that 3 of Wands and I said, it's going to happen in between March 30th and April 9th, it might also mean, because it's the 3 of Wands, at a time when you have assumed leadership of something, when you have when you have major investment and you're waiting for the outcome to come back. So there's a qualitative as well as a quantitative thing.
We have a question about, I'll go to the one about significators in a second, but there's a question here that someone struggles with the major arcana for some reason. The minors are a lot more accessible for me. Any tips for tackling them? What are the major differences between the two?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think majors are hard because they're so big, you almost can't see them. I think with majors, because it's you can kind of only see them if you step back like a huge amount a lot of the time. It's sort of like, how can you think about the concept of the Wheel of Fortune, right? It's like, it's so impersonal, it's so huge. And of course, the number one way is to first start just seeing how it comes up card of the day. What happened that day? In what way did the energy of this card show up? But in terms of majors versus minors, I tend to look at the majors as opportunities to change something about myself that I want to change, because it's big, it's internal, everybody's got it, it's archetypal. If there's and also another thing about it is that majors, to me, tend to be less negotiable. It's sort of like, if something's going to happen and it's showing up as a major, you don't have as much ability to play with the shape of it as you do, because it's internal. It's an internal shift rather than something little like changing the lock on your door, So, and I would say just become, work with it and see what happens. Like for me, one of the ways that, say, the High Priestess, which is one of the most mystical and kind of hard to grasp of them all, one of the ways she shows up for me is silence. doing things in silence. Another thing that she shows up for me as um, studying, reading, because she has the little book there or the little scroll under her arm. So they, even big cards can show up in little ways. And usually the little way that they show up is a key to understanding the bigger meaning behind them. So, if I draw the High Priestess and I happen to be reading a lot that day, the message might be in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think goes back to what you're saying about the importance of actually drawing every day so that you can develop that understanding over time.
Exactly.
We
Exactly.
have,
No,
we
go
have a
ahead.
couple questions actually about that card of the day, which I wanted to ask. I'll kind of ask them together. One person wrote in the learning process that you mentioned, how do you draw a card of the day? Do you have a particular question or intention in mind?
Yeah, so I've done it different ways over the years. In the beginning, I had a very sort of like left brain technique where I would shuffle 7 times and reverse it like 3 times in between. It was ridiculous, but I tend to be a lot more free flowing about it now. Similarly, I used to kind of be more. I would keep a question in mind, and now I don't. I started using 2 cards instead of 1 card about 5 years ago, and that's been great. I like having the cards talk to each other as well as me. So that's good. And at first, when I started doing it, one thing I found helpful was to assign myself a task in looking at them. I would look for something to look for, and something to try. So it's that sort of divination magic thing. I would say, okay, in these cards, I'm going to look for one thing that I'm going to see if it shows up in the day and in the world around me. And I'm also going to try one thing that these cards suggest. So that, I think, is a good way of kind of developing the magical side of the practice. Nowadays, I tend to try to clear my mind as much as possible. It is part of a larger rite that I do every day, and that's why I was late doing our pre-test, because I was in the middle of rites. So for me, it's like the whole drawing of the card is a big process for me. It's like every day there's like a 20-30 minute thing that happens. Then the drawing of the card is the height of that, the climax of that. Because to me, in order to invest the cards with meaning, I have to kind of go into a place. And, I talk to the gods, I talk to my ancestors, I talk to, today is Sunday, so I talk to the sun, and there's a bunch of things that I do to kind of put myself in that headspace and then draw the cards. And by sort of going there and having these sort of words I say and actions I do, and, just like you would do in any kind of ritual, at the moment when I finally turn over the cards and look at them, I'm prepared to draw meaning out of them. And I think that that's very helpful to do with your card of the day, even if it's as simple as like lighting a candle and then afterwards blowing it out, or, something, or always doing it in the same place, or always saying the same thing when you do it. I think that sort of creating those grooves of ritual allows your brain to kind of get in a better place for it, more receptive.
Does that also go, would you say, for when you're reading for others, or is that more specific for when you're doing your card of the day? Or do you have a ritual?
That's specific for me. For others, it's a little different because I'm so other oriented as it is that like just talking to someone puts me in their headspace, and it doesn't take a lot for me to be there. So, I used to be a little bit more programmatic about it, but now it's pretty much, as long as if I'm sitting in the space, or if I've set up the Zoom setup nowadays, that's almost enough to get me there. And if I'm shuffling, the feel of the cards in my hands, the microphone in front of me, or sitting across from the table, but seeing the other person's face is enough to kind of set things going for me. And one tool I do use sometimes during readings is stone. I use a labradorite stone. And sometimes when I'm having a little trouble making connections, this helps me. I've tried different things. This seems to be, a palm stone seems to be the best for me. And the other thing is that, like, I do have rituals coming out. Like if I've been reading for 5 hours straight, I'm definitely not a human being anymore at some level. So, in order to come out of that, I definitely have to take 10 minutes to shut down. And to me, I use the tree of life to do that. I descend from the top of the tree of life to the bottom astrally to get myself back into just me form. But yeah, it's a weird feeling.
Very necessary, I'm sure, after that many hours.
Yeah.
We have two questions about readings, which I just wanted to put both of them out there at once, and then you can maybe, I think they relate very well. One person asked, what tarot spread do you use when reading for others? Do you change the spread for various topics? And the other question was, are significator cards really necessary to pull before reading?
Okay, yeah, those are great questions. So I keep it really simple with spreads. So I do not like the Celtic cross anymore. I used to do that all the time, and it's like, to me, it's like somebody comes to you for a question and you take out the encyclopedia. You don't need that much. A lot of the time you can just answer it with 2 cards. So I try to keep it as simple as possible. And even if I do a larger spread, I mean, if I were to do something as large as a Celtic cross spread, it would be because it's made up of 2 card spreads, basically. Like, here's the past and here's the future and here's the present. That's a 3 card spread. What to look for, what's around you, those sorts of things are all parts of 2 card spreads. So I try to keep it as close to the question as possible. I prefer it when people have questions because I feel like I can get them better answers when there's questions. But sometimes I will sort of, like, if someone comes and they have nothing in particular they want to look at, I will do a sort of a story spread where we look at their life, look at their past life. I'll say, okay, divide your life into chapters like it's a book, and we'll draw a card for each of those. And that will give us sort of a biography that we can start with talking. And then usually in the course of like doing that, it becomes clear what it is they really want to talk about. And then we can use the rest of the time to look at that. Oh, and as far as significators go, I don't use them. However, one thing but that's qualified. I mean, like when I do readings for people, a lot of the time, I will notice that one card comes up more than once to represent that person, right? So I won't choose a significator, but a significator will sometimes choose the client. So there's that. And also, quite often when I'm doing readings for people, like for a woman, if the first queen that comes up, very often I will find that the client really relates to that queen in one way. So it becomes a kind of significator. I have a historic identification with the Queen of Swords. So, when I see her, I sometimes get a little ping, of recognition, but I try not to, I don't really use that a lot because I think that, the significator is the deck. We are all 78 cards.
I very much agree. Yes, I think. We have 2 questions that are also, I think, very connected, so I will ask them together. This is more about your personal practice and how you connect. Do you have a daily practice that is somewhat separate from tarot that helps you connect? And also, do you feel tired after particularly long readings, reading? And if so, how do you replenish yourself?
Yeah, those are good questions. So I do, I have so many rituals in life that it's like, it's a great source of great frustration to my family because it takes me, half an hour to get up. It takes me 40 minutes to get to bed. There is like databases to fill in. There's diaries to write. There's like all these things that are related to extracting meaning out of the day, actually. At the end of every day, I do look back at how the cards showed up, and I do chronicle that in my spreadsheet, and I will write about it in my diary in a more sort of free-flowing fashion. All of that is a way of processing, and I've kept this diary every day since I was like 12. So there's a lot there, and it's also part of what makes me who I am. So that's a principal ritual for me. But in general, and in terms of the kind of more normal practices that people do, I do like to meditate. I do feel that it's something that I should do every day, and I don't. I'm a person who kind of does triage meditation, which is terrible. You shouldn't have to do that. You know, I mean, if you're if you're doing triage meditation, then you obviously need a daily meditation practice. But I do rely on it for resetting my frame of mind. Yeah. And what was the other question?
The other question was basically about how do you replenish yourself after like a tiring reading session.
Yeah. So for me, yeah, that feeling of, I can usually handle one or two readings, long readings, okay, but you know, there was one time last year before all of this happened where I was doing a whole day of readings, short readings, and there were like 35. I mean, it was nuts. And then, you know, when you come down from that, you can't even feel the earth under your feet anymore. So I eat after that. I definitely, you know, hydration is very important, but it's about re-entering the body. So anything that sort of gets me back into my body is good. And for me, it's food because I love food. So anything that is strong tasting, salty, you know, yeasty, funky, and water will do it. I can't really drink anymore. It's age. My metabolism can't take it. Otherwise, I would really enjoy that. But yeah.
Yeah, I find the salt, I don't like the taste of it. You know, when you're coming down from that, you're like, ooh, too pretty. I don't want it, but it's important.
Yeah, it does. And you know, the last thing I want after that is sugar, because sugar just makes you even further away from, you know, wherever it was that you needed to be.
We have one more question, and then I have one question, and then we're going to do a couple short readings.
Okay.
The last question to answer here is, someone asked, do you ever do any journeying/meditation with the cards? As somebody thinking of starting this, what card would you recommend beginning with?
Oh, how interesting. So yes, a couple years ago, I started journeying a lot. I started out with the Edwin Steinbrecher method, which is very compatible with tarot. And then I sort of went to a more freeform shamanic journey and neo-shamanic journeying practice. I haven't been doing it recently. But I do think that it's good to meditate on cards. I think that, you know, the classic one to journey to is the High Priestess. I think it's good to have a relationship with the High Priestess, and it's wise to go to her first if you're journeying on a tarot card. If you want to do other kinds of journeying, I journeyed to the elements first. I found that was really helpful and useful. My only problem with journeying to the High Priestess, and I've done it a few times, is that because I'm so, you know, tied to the correspondence of the High Priestess is the moon, always has been. And so the first time I tried to journey to the priestess, I got a little confused and I went to the moon card instead. And that is not someplace you want to go for your first time. Don't go to the moon first. It's a scary place. So yeah, go to the High Priestess.
Yes, firmly on earth, but the High Priestess. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought we could do a couple of these little questions.
Okay.
If you are ready.
I'm
going to choose randomly. Let's see, random number. Pull this up. Okay. Fantastic. The first question is, what do I need to know about my upcoming work project?
Oh, okay. Fantastic. You know, I'm going to try switching cameras so that they can see the cards as I'm drawing them. Here you go. All right. Let's shift myself over too. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. Let me just look at it again. What do I need to know about my upcoming work projects?
Okay. All right. Let's see. We'll do this with one card. So I look for cards by feel, as you can tell. This one. It's definitely a tactile process for me. Okay, so let us see. What do you need to know about your upcoming work projects? Ah, the Fool. Wow,
Fantastic.
how exciting. Yeah, fantastic. So yes, the first thing that you need to know is that it's going to be scary and exciting, and it's okay to approach this with a beginner mind, right? You don't really need to be an advanced tarot reader to know what this card is. That there are, don't feel like you have to have all the answers, because the Fool is about not having any of the answers. It's okay to be a beginner. It's okay to undertake these projects in a spirit of exploration, rather than feeling like you have to produce a polished project. And that if you feel scared, that's probably good. This is an opportunity to take a little bit of a creative risk.
Beautiful. That is beautiful. Of course, I'm not the only one, I'm sure. That's like one of my favorite cards, of course. So, so happy for you, whoever you are. So let's take a look at another question. I'll get another number. Okay, pretty straightforward. What must I do to improve my financial outlook?
That's always a good question, especially right now. Okay, I think it's this one. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. High Priestess.
Speaking of her, how interesting.
Yeah, a very big and mystical answer to a very concrete question. So a lot of this would be easier to answer if I had more context about how they were thinking about improving their financial outlook. In some concrete answers, depending on the person's situation, could be that it has to do with, suppose they have an intuitive practice of some kind, that the High Priestess might reference if they had specifically something like that. However, in terms of a general answer from the High Priestess, now is a time it's an inward time. It's not a time for spending and consuming. It's a time for looking inward and assessing, maybe even doing the numbers, maybe even concentrating on things that you normally don't look at, because the High Priestess is about what's normally invisible. So the things that you normally would not be paying attention to, like, for example, what's going on with your retirement portfolio, what's going on with your benefits. Do you have a plan for your health insurance? Things like that that are normally kind of under the radar. So the High Priestess, I think, is, what I mean by that is signified by the veil behind her. So these are things that are normally secrets and hidden, and now's the time to look deeper and further inside.
Yeah, the hidden sides of things. All right, let's do one more. And I'm sorry we can't get to everyone. We had so many questions submitted, which is wonderful. But like I said, if the last one I choose is not yours, you can become a patron of her Fortune's Wheelhouse and submit your question. Mm-hmm. Fabulous. So random number. And which one is that? What is the best way to nurture the relationship I'm currently in? A relationship.
Ooh, okay. All right. Let's see. So if I had the person in front of me, I would probably start by doing one card for them and one card for their partner, and then maybe one card for answering how to nurture the relationship. But I think for this, I'm just going to concentrate on that one answer. How do I nurture that relationship? I'm second guessing myself. I hate it when I do that. Okay, that's good. All right. Page of Cups. Okay. Oh, that's so sweet. Okay, and it is reversed too. So, so look for something that you're definitely not doing right now. Okay. So some of the significations of the Page of Cups have to do with romance. So like being willing to entertain the dreams and the younger parts of the person that you're involved with. So, this is an anti-practical card. So rather than like, some people might do better by, getting down to brass tacks and doing the logistics of their partner and figuring out, who's going to do the chores, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes people do need that to solidify their relationship. Yours is not like that. This is a relationship that needs time and space for dreaming, for just kind of being with each other and being allowing yourself to think about not who the person is, but who they might be. Allowing your fantasies of the person to have a little bit of a head. So like often when we're falling in love, the fantasies kind of take over and as opposed to the real person. And that becomes a problem. But it looks like right now, a little bit of that might be called for, a little bit of romanticization of the other person.
Excellent. Yeah. I think those all three, just with one card, was very, very clear.
Tarot's great. Tarot can answer anything.
Yes. So wonderful. So I have one last question before we end for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of it's an end point and a beginning point. I wanted to ask if you have any general advice that you would want to give to people about incorporating divination practices into their day. We've talked a lot about, the starting off with the 1 or 2 cards pulls. Mm-hmm. Is there any other advice that you'd want to share with people about? About that?
Yeah, I just thought of something actually. I thought about the idea of ambient tarot, which is something that I remember talking to Austin Coppock about a while back. And it's the idea that if tarot is just a friend, a person you can talk to, then you can talk to them kind of anytime. And it's not necessary to do the whole ritual if you don't want to. You can also have a casual relationship with tarot, and you can say, this is a thing that's on my mind right now because I happen to be thinking about my friend I haven't seen in a long time. And you can just look at a card and see what does tarot have to say about that? I think it's really good to do that. Or even I am not, this is funny because I remember, my father-in-law, who is a bit skeptical of tarot, said, well, you don't use it to make decisions, do you? And I was like, oh, no. And I was like, you know what? I actually do all the time. Little decisions like, should I do my, should I go do the dishes right now? Or should I take some time for myself to do this thing I feel like doing? And then I will take it from a should question into a what will happen if question. So I'll draw a card for each of those scenarios and kind of give myself a way to think through that. So that's you can do that anytime, any day. However, the one thing that I do think is very important, which I haven't mentioned before in our talk, is that you must respect the answer. Don't draw again if you didn't like the answer. Respect the answer, because by doing that, you develop the relationship of trust and respect between you and your cards. And if you don't, then it reduces the amount of available meaning in the cards. So even if it's, short term, you don't like what you're seeing, ask, what can I do about that? Don't say that was a garbage answer, I'm throwing you out.
If it's a relationship, then you have to be respectful in that relationship when someone speaks to you about the advice they've given you.
Yes, exactly. It's important. Yeah.
That is wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much. We could keep going for a long time. I'm really sure. So I hope we will be able to have you back on another time so we can keep talking about tarot, because this has been wonderful. I just want to say again, her book is Tarot Correspondences, Ancient Secrets for Everyday Readers. It's sitting right next to me right now. And it's fantastic. And you should really check out her podcast, Fortune's Wheelhouse, which is also really wonderful. And thank you so much. Thank you
Thank you so
everyone for
much.
joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
A fantastic second show. Thank you for tuning in, and thanks to everyone who joined in live and submitted questions via the webinar. We'll continue to do that each time via Zoom, so I encourage everyone to check our website to register. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you enjoy what we're doing here, and check out our website at coffeeanddivination.com. You can also find me on Twitter, where I am @FiddleAngel. Enjoy your journeys with divination, and I'll see you next time.